afternoon, good evening. Welcome to folks. I've had a quick look and we have people on the West Coast and people on the East Coast. And we have folks from all places in between. So welcome to the 5th of our Fall Canada Returns to Basketball webinars. Tonight, our featured speaker is Reid Scott. Reid is a FIBA licensed official living in Kelowna, British Columbia, works in the health industry, has been heavily involved in many things related to COVID over a number of months, and is here to talk to us tonight about certainly a subject that fits both basketball and Canada's dealing with COVID. Reid's session tonight is about resiliency. I'm going to turn it over to Reid in just a second. Certainly thank him for being our presenter tonight. Just a reminder for everyone, if you've got questions as we go, you can put them in the chat. And I said earlier, there'll be some opportunity for interaction with Reid, and we'll use the hands up feature if you want to come in and provide feedback at that time. So if I can, Reid, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the introduction and welcome everybody. And thank you for taking some time out of your busy week away from your families to invest in your referee development and knowledge. So big congratulations to you for taking the time out. So thank you. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint here. So I might need some problem solving. Hopefully Rike jump in if we need to do anything. To share my screen.
Yeah, you're up there now, Reid.
Perfect. Thank you. Awesome. And actually, thanks, Mike, for that transition, because really the genesis of this topic today came about of actually our conversation of resiliency in our healthcare system and just what that means and how we're going to unpack that and how we're going to use it in the future to kind of be a more resilient in our health systems and our health systems governance. But what that did is trigger me, because I was sitting in a bunch of meetings, triggering me. It's like, how would this apply to refereeing? Must have been a busy meeting. So how would this apply to referee development? Because we really, in the past, haven't really dug deep into resiliency training. We've always been exposed to mental skills that are available and well researched and evidence that we can use in our referee development to help with their focus during a game, how to debrief after the game. We've always kind of had those around, but we really haven't started digging into just what resiliency means for referees. In context to, and I'll use the example of youth academies in the English soccer system or football system, it would be proper use. They found the #1 factor in one of their youth academy students making it to the professional first team. They found the most dominant factor was their resiliency, and however they measured that at the time. And so what became out of that when they found that is actually a whole bunch of research started and a whole bunch of skill development and identifying certain skill sets that lean towards a resilient athlete. So my purpose today is to kind of introduce kind of the understanding what resiliency is and how it can apply to us here as referees. So I will preface, I will be using the word athlete a lot in a lot of my presentation, but please shift that context to the lens of what that means as a referee. Okay, so our learning goals for today, we're going to unpack. So we're going to introduce and define what resiliency means, again, in our context. And introduce you to some strategies and some skills to help develop resiliency in yourself and specifically with your refereeing. We're going to show you there's a few ways to measure resiliency that's evidence-based and validated. And I'm just going to show some available resources and tools that you can take home with you and start exploring for yourself and putting together a development plan for you as well. So the first thing we need to do is really apply definition to this. So there's lots of definitions out there, but the one that I found the most applicable to kind of our use in kind of the context of sport and officiating is really resiliency is the ability to withstand pressures and adversity, maintaining performance and well-being through difficult situations. And being referees, we're always challenged with difficult situations. And our ability to work through those and learn and apply it to the next game is really what resiliency is and how we do that over time. And then I applied it to kind of what that means being mentally tough. And so there's this quote I found from James Leith, where it says, a resilient athlete is mentally tough. Mental toughness requires you to be aware of a situation, assess the situation for lessons, then continue your journey of improvement. And really what this is continuous improvement and just applying some skills in the context of resiliency on that pathway to improvement as a referee. So our first activity I'm going to ask for the group is, and we can use the chat box for this. So I'd like to hear from you what resiliency means to you in your life, and maybe in refereeing, not in refereeing, but what stands out to you? And so I'll let Rike just kind of moderate the box there and just start throwing down some ideas about what resiliency means to you. And I apologize, Rike, I cannot see the commentary, so I'm wondering if you can jump in as well.
Sure. The ability not to dwell on mistakes and look ahead, working under pressure and time constraints. Getting past any errors to get to the next play, being able to bounce back from a pressure situation. How quickly you can get back up after being knocked down.
That's a good one. Yeah, I'll give a few more seconds if there's a few more there.
Staying focused on the task, never giving up on any situations.
Okay, good. All good examples. And really there is no wrong, there's no wrong application of what resiliency means to you. The one that really points to kind of what we're going to unpack today is getting knocked down, but having the ability to get up and get going. That's a really good one that we'll see kind of as a theme throughout. So thanks for that, Rike. So developing resiliency. And there's a nice quote there. Those that have people in and with parents with sailboats will know this very well. Usually it sits somewhere in the boat. But this is a really good example of really what it means. Smooth sails do not make a skillful sailor, and there's no truer sense. So really anything hard or challenging will be uncomfortable at first. And it's our job, maybe as referee coaches and referees, to be exposed repeatedly to these difficult situations with some skills. So over time, it will become more comfortable, and we'll be more confident and more competent. So there's many different ways that kind of we've seen in resiliency and how to develop. So I've kind of just highlighted 4 major skills here that seem to come up commonly when I've done my research. So one is really to define what resiliency is to you and what it means. We have to be clear what resiliency is. And we also have to have a little bit of a toolkit with some psychology skills. And I'll introduce you a few psychological skills and just further on in the presentation here, so that you can take that home with you. Specifically, there's a couple acronyms here, which are some of those skills, which is the ABCs in your ARSE. So I'll unpack that as well. And managing the environment, and really how do we use the environment to help us train better? So as I pointed out earlier, we've defined what resiliency is, but it is not just a case of either having or lacking resilience. It's something that will depend on the situation, and which individuals can develop over time. Clarifying and defining resilience is important because this allows a common language between sports psychologists, coaches, and the athlete, in our case, referees themselves, from which they can work to develop resilience. So as I pointed out earlier, there's some psychological skills that we can apply to this. First one is self-awareness. Self-awareness, which helps the referee to have knowledge of their thoughts and their emotions and to develop a more positive outlook. Second one is self-talk, and we've been exposed to this, I think, with some of the psychological skills or mental skills through the FIBA guides. Self-talk is a big one. So self-talk, which helps athletes to concentrate better and to be persistent, as well as be in the moment, especially during game. Use of mental imagery, which helps athletes and referees to visualize what they want to achieve and can help to reduce nerves and boost confidence. And finally, goal setting and preparation skills, which helps us focus on what we can control and puts us in a better position to perform under pressure, and the key being their pressure. So the ABCs, as I pointed out earlier. First one, so resilient athletes need to have a challenge mindset. This means that they face challenges, facing challenges positively, and believe that they have the resources to overcome them. The research suggests that we can help athletes to develop a challenge mindset by getting to learn their ABCs. So the first one is A for activating. It means, what are the events that might trigger difficult situations? And being referees, we know those red flag situations and those triggers that we can have in a game, whether it's an interaction with a coach, interaction with a player, a misapplication of a rule, a missed call, so on and so on. And B is the beliefs. How do you take in your belief about the activating event? So how do you wrap your head around what happened, and making sure that actually you do it in a positive way as opposed to a negative way, and see the consequences of the event on your emotions and behavior. So what was the event? How did it affect you, and how did it affect your emotions? If you use those ABCs, you have a better way of unpacking that situation after the game. Second set of skills is what we call the ARSE method. So first we have to acknowledge, and this is actually a really good method, and I'll get to it a little bit later, of actually doing this as a debrief during our post game. So if there's an error or something happened that we need to talk about a crew, or maybe we have a referee coach there to help us out, we first have to acknowledge that an error is there and what frustration it's caused, either the individual referee or the crew itself. R is review. So we have to review the play and determine how and why the error occurred. So we need to learn why. S is for strategize. So how can we make necessary corrections for the future? So yes, we acknowledge there's an error. We saw that there was an error, or we received feedback that there was an error if we don't have video. But what are we going to do about that? How are we going to turn that into a learning opportunity? And finally, E, execute. So prepare for the next play. But I would also kind of translate into that. So how are you going to fix the issue, and how are you going to work on it so you have a better chance of not having that happen again? And as I mentioned earlier, one of the factors is managing the environment. So, and finally, for a challenging mindset to work best, we need to create an environment that facilitates athlete resilience. It's not all about testing athletes' ability to withstand pressure. It's also important to find and create an environment in which they can thrive. The best environment for resilience is one that is high in both challenge and in support. Coaches can create this by maintaining high expectations of the athlete's abilities and their performance, while also providing support. It's a recipe for high athlete performance and well-being. Research suggests that this environment can be achieved with a method called pressure inurement training. Really, which it is training under pressure or simulated scenarios. This usually involves gradually increasing the level of pressure the athletes are exposed to in their training over time, and through increasing the challenge and manipulating the environment. And then we would monitor those athletes and referees and their response to this to see if they're actually making improvements based on that. So really what it comes to, and we've all been, wherever we are in our journey as referees, we've all had to start at the beginning. And really what this means in our real life is, like, we all have to start at the elementary level, at at the Steve Nash level, at the city youth leagues level, we all have to start here, as the picture is pointing out. So we just develop our skills here. And then over time, as we refine our skills and we develop skills and we get better and better, we eventually start getting into higher and higher competition because we've developed competencies over time and we've demonstrated those. So, but we always have to start from the beginning in order to get to the end there. And you can see our Michael Whelan there in the Olympic final, which is a good example. So the environment is a major factor in how we want to develop referees using the lens of resilience. So now we're going to go through using a learning activity, and I'm going to ask some people maybe to provide some examples if they would feel comfortable doing that. So what do we do, or how do we recover from mistakes or a bad performance? Like in the past, we may not have exposure to some mentors or coaches available to us to help us debrief. We've either done it with our crews ourselves. Sometimes we're all by ourselves. So how do you do that by yourself? Sometimes driving home in the car, or you're on the bus, or however you're walking home from your game. So how do we take any mistake and a negative performance and turn that around and turn it into something positive? So what I'm going to ask the audience here is to walk through an example of how you can reframe an error or wanted performance. And so again, I'd like to see if somebody would like to provide an example that we can walk through.
Read, Tim in the chat said, reflect objectively.
Okay. And maybe I misspoke, but would somebody feel comfortable sharing an example or a scenario they've been through recently where maybe they had a mistake or something happened in the game and it really bothered them, and they're not quite sure maybe how to progress out of that? Enrique, let me know if you have a volunteer there. If not, we can use another example. I have a recent example as well.
Well, I can give you an example, Reed. It happened in my first year refereeing, and I'm in my 5th year now. But I had a horrendous game, and my mind when I went to the game beforehand, I thought I should have called in and said, my mind is not on the game. It was on a friend that was sick at the time. And I thought I should have just called in and said, find a replacement. But I found out about an hour before game time that this was happening. So I was really not in the game very well. Lucky I had an experienced referee with me, and he encouraged me. I explained what happened before the game, and I said, I'm really thinking about this friend of mine. And it was tough. It was a tough game. I knew I wasn't making the calls that I should have been making. But my other referee was very good. We did have a couple incidents that I should have handled better, but he came to my rescue a couple times. So what I took away from that game, like, I felt awful after the game, not only because I had refereed very poorly, but I also felt I'd let down my partner. He didn't feel that way, thank goodness. I refereed with him later, a couple times later, and he was very supportive and still is supportive. So I came away with that and kept refereeing because I felt really bad. I felt like I was going to quit. My friend who was sick recovered, thank goodness. But you know, the thing was, I decided after that game that either you stop refereeing or you get your mind set going before the game time. It was tough. It was a tough time for me. That the next couple of weeks, I tried to improve on what I was doing, and I enjoy refereeing now. I really do, and I find that you have to be in the right mindset to before you step on the floor, and if you're not, you shouldn't be there. You should find a replacement as quickly as you can. Sometimes you can't, so I don't know how you put your mind, you know, out of that, out of yourself, you know, and get back into the game. That can be difficult sometimes.
Thank you very much for sharing that story, and being open, and feeling comfortable sharing that. That's a really good example. And sorry, I didn't get your name, because I can't quite see who's talking in my.
It's Don Lohr.
Don, thank you very much for sharing that.
I referee in Edmonton.
Awesome, thank you, Don. So you brought out and actually kind of walked through some of the steps that we're going to introduce in a second. So what Don did there is walk us through in a scenario where obviously he didn't have the game he wanted to. There was other factors influencing him and his ability to be ready for the game. And things didn't go well in the game, but he was able to kind of unpack it a little bit and be able to move forward. And so there are some really key elements in that. So Don acknowledged that, like, yeah, I didn't have, this wasn't the best game. I had some influences that were completely understandable. But Don, what I liked what you did there was you reframed it in the way that you said you took the bad experience of that game, and what you did is turn it into a learning opportunity. And then you had a strategy, and you just mentioned the strategy at the end there, where feel free to jump back in, but you found a way. So next time I would do X, Y, Z differently, or I would maybe have taken that game or found somebody else. But you had a strategy to really adapt to that scenario for the next time if it were to happen. So thank you very much for doing that. Rike, any other examples there, or anybody else who wants to share?
Yeah, there's quite a few examples in the chat.
Okay.
I missed calling a foul on a defender that tapped a shooter on the top of the head on subsequent shots. The shooter blew up at me. I didn't react well. An official misses a call leading to a coach expressing their frustration leading to a technical foul. When I was in the lead position and during the rotation, there was a very hard foul and I missed the call, but my partner called it. After that, the coach had a bad reaction, except the players. But after I knew what I needed to do, I kept my attention and the coach was back. And then there's some advice in here. Some people said to watch the game film afterwards and review the situations, ask others as to how they would have handled the situation. We've all made errors, so ask mentors for their way of handling that event.
Awesome, all great examples, and that's going to lead right into my next slide. So thank you for those that contributed in the chat, and Dawn, thank you for sharing your story. That was great. So how do we recover from those mistakes? We all have them. Like, we all will experience mistakes in refereeing. We're human. That's part of the condition. Far as I know it, they haven't developed robot referees yet. But I mean, mistakes are just going to be part of life, but how we recover from them and how do we improve our skill set so the chances of them reduce in the future, that's kind of what we're talking about as next steps. So recovering from mistakes or negative performances. A great way to unpack an unwanted event and reframe it by turning it into a learning opportunity with some planned action. So that is like, so now what do I do? Yeah, and a mistake happened. I definitely don't want to do it again. But what are some strategies to kind of take that to the next step and work on it and practice it? So that's what I'm going to unpack a little bit right now. And as we said, this is a great debrief method that you can do either with your referee, coach, or your partners after a game. And so you can unpack really the error and then have a plan moving forward. So the first one is acknowledge. So yes, we acknowledge the error and the frustration it's caused, but the next part is we have to accept it. Yes, it's happened. We've acknowledged it, it's accepted, and then we have to move on. And this is really easier said than done, but you need to leave it behind you in order to focus on how to improve it in front of you. Next is recovery talk. So you can do that either in the game or after the game, be like, I am not doing that again. That is not a position I want to be in. I never want to have another interaction with a coach like that. I want that scenario to happen less in the future. And then third, as I pointed out earlier, is review what happened and reframe it in a way that turns into an action item that has some improvement attached to it. So review your performance, and we're lucky some of us have ability to access video of our games either soon or during the games, which is great. If you don't, maybe having an in-person who is there watching the game to give you their feedback, some way of giving you feedback to let you know what actually happened. And then reframing that, so acknowledging that error occurred, identifying what happened, and then creating a learning opportunity. So rather than dwelling on it, flip it around and go, well, I'm not going to have that happen again. That's a really good learning opportunity, rather than just dwelling on it and just holding it in you for a long time and maybe letting you affect the next player, the next game, or the next game. But turning it around really quickly and turning it into a learning opportunity for yourself is really key. And then 4 is kind of practice in a simulated environment. And this is tricky for referees. So we know what we did wrong. And we have an idea how we want to fix it. But how do you apply that change in skill in an environment that's going to simulate kind of what a game looks like? And that's tricky for referees because normally our environments that we are live games. We really don't get in the referee sense a practice scenario where we can practice these things. Very rarely, maybe at some camps, but usually it's live basketball going on and we're being service providers and we have to referee the game. We can't practice whatever we want to improve during the game. Rarely that provides us the opportunity, but ideally we want to take what we're trying to work on and then apply it in a similar environment and test it to see how well we do with it and see if we can see evidence of change and improvement over time. So examples of that could be if you normally work at the senior high school level, maybe at the college level, take a level that you traditionally wouldn't do very much, whether it's a grade 8 game, whether it's a junior high game, one that you feel really comfortable with. You're not going to miss calls. You just have more time and space in it, where you can apply and try and test some of these new skills that you want to apply or want to try out. So when you go back to your high school games or your college games, you've at least tried some of the skills and you'll have a better chance of applying it in the games you traditionally do. And the last point is measuring your improvement to see if you're actually making an improvement. And that can be tricky as well. As far as I know, we don't have a grading, like a systemized grading scale, and all our games are graded. We don't have that budget, nor do we have that infrastructure to do that. We're not like the NBA, where they're provided a scale and empirical data let them know if they're better or worse. So what you're probably looking at doing is either recording and videoing your next games and looking for evidence that you've made that change in a positive direction, or having a friend sit in the stand say, hey, I want you to watch, I'm trying to work on this. I had an issue a couple of weeks ago. I really want to work on it. can you watch this and let me know how I did? And so at least you're getting some anecdotal feedback that lets you know if you're on the right track or not. And if you do that repeatedly, practice in a simulated environment and seek feedback or watch some games so you have an idea how, if you're improving or not, you'll have a much better chance of fixing that, whatever that skill set is, improving it so you have better opportunity to face that challenge when it comes in the future or down the road in new games. All right. So I mentioned about measuring resiliency earlier. So there are a lot of validated tools out there. They're mostly aimed not really at the athlete, but the whole person. So I'm just going to show one example of resiliency assessment. But it's more to cue you to maybe dig a little deeper and see if there's some other ones that I couldn't find on this. But this is a very standardized, validated tool that I was able to get through, or at least connected to through a colleague of mine at the Health Authority. So this is the brief resiliency scale. So it was developed to purely to assess the concept of resilience or measure its ability of being resilient. According to the authors, the scale is a reliable tool for assessing factors of resilience in terms of the ability to recover and bounce back from stress. So in our case, we'd have to apply it in the lens of the stress of basketball, the stress of a game, the stress of a scenario. But at least it is a tool and a measure that that may not be very specific to basketball, but again, the whole person. But at least it's something that we could take and then take over time to see if we're starting to see any change in that in the direction of goodness. And the scale really provides both a unique and important information about the person and how they cope with health-related stressors. So in our case, the health-related stressor would be basketball and the pressure of a basketball game on our ability as referees. And like I said, there's a lot of other questionnaires around resiliency, but from what I've seen, this is the most validated tool that I've seen out there. But if you find one, please share it with myself or Rike. It'd be great to see if we can have a sport-specific one down the line. So building your resources. So where can you get lot more tools around resiliency, how you can access knowledge bases around resiliency so you can start applying it and putting a resiliency skill set into your tool belt. So the first of all is find mentors or cheerleaders, people that are on that have your back and can give you honest feedback. Again, as I was pointing out on how we may want to debrief and turn an error into a learning opportunity. Having those people to give you that honest feedback on, yeah, I'm seeing an improvement, yes or no, and being honest with you, like, no, maybe I'm not seeing that improvement. But having people that have your back and that you can lean on to have these conversations is really key. And accessing networks that we have lots of networks in the sport world in Canada. I mean, with CBOC, you have access to coaches. We have Mike Thompson as kind of our referee in chief here. We have lots of referee coaches that coach at a very high level of FIBA. So we have lots of referee resources and wealth around those coaching resources that we can access if we need to, which is great. And of course, there's always books, YouTube's, articles. You can get lost in this in YouTube, especially around athlete development and athlete resilience, and just kind of apply that lens to refereeing. So there's lots out there. So I'd really encourage you to kind of go, if you find this really interesting, you want to go do a deep dive and find some more skill sets that I haven't mentioned here. But there's lots out there. So Rika, I'm assuming that the group here will have access to this. I'll send my PowerPoint and then they can take these resources as they need them.
Yep, I can do that.
Okay. And so I'm going to just walk through our learning goals again. Hopefully I was successful in kind of achieving those learning goals, or at least unpacking it in a way that is meaningful to you. So we first introduced you to resiliency and what that meant in the context of refereeing and maybe in athletics. We introduced some basic strategies on how to develop resiliency and develop skills that will lead to resiliency. I've shown a simple way to measure resiliency, although there's lots others out there. And and I've shown some, again, just some basic resources and tools, but there are a ton out there. Most people are pretty savvy with the internet, so they can go crazy if they want. So feedback. So what I'm looking for you and from the audience here is, what are ways, or do you see an opportunity that we could integrate resiliency training into referee development within CVOC? Do you think that's a good idea, not a good idea? I know we have some elements of the resiliency skills that you see there, but maybe it's not packaged like resiliency training. And so just interested to hear your feedback. Is this something that we should be looking at maybe at CVOC and as referee coaches? So maybe that's something we can just throw in the chat there, Rike, and if you can read some of those off.
Sure. Someone said definite necessity. Yes, I think recognizing the ability to bounce back as a skill of referees is good.
I'll give it a few more seconds there, Rike, if there's any
Sure.
other.
That is a good idea. I believe it is a necessity. Referee camps with games to referee. Given the turnover of referees, I would suggest more information sharing would be a good idea. Too often new officials become discouraged and give up due to stressors. Younger officials require reinforcement.
Very good points. Mike, I've seen you come on camera here. Are you adding something?
No, I was just coming on, just getting a feel of where you were in the presentation. So
I am coming up to my last slide here. So that's it for the presentation. Hopefully I did a relatively adequate job, but just really introducing the concept of resiliency and showing some basic skills that we can maybe start integrating into our referee development in our development packages that we have with CVOC. So questions. Happy to take questions here the next 5 to 10 minutes. I'm not sure we're budgeted for time, but happy to take some questions either by chat or by audio if needed.
So does anybody have any particular questions from Reed, anything talked about? There is a comment here, Reed. Someone has said, my thought is that there are two types of resiliency, physical and mental, and each has different requirements. Both have to be addressed. Any thoughts?
A very good point, actually. And one distinction I didn't make, there is that physical and there is that mental component of resiliency. So whether the physical attribute is, we talk about physical resiliency, we see that in athletes and their ability to perform a certain function, but the mental side of things, most of the resiliency talk is around the mental aspect of resiliency, but the physical side definitely applies as well.
There's a question here, Reed, but it might be more properly addressed by me, but I'm not sure I'm going to come up with an answer. It's Bill Magnus in Ottawa said, is this a topic that CBOC is expanding on? Well, it's in the long list of topics. So yes, but it's not something that we're going to be able to do soon.
Reed, it's Mike Para here from Seaway Valley in Cornwall, Ontario. The only reason I'm not typing it in because I don't type very well, and it's a bit of a long-winded question. If you're trying to deal, I've been an official for probably 30 years now plus, and I guess I'm looking for what your thoughts are if you've seen younger officials that we try to mentor that you know and they know they've both booted a call or a game or they've had a poor performance. How do we, what's the best way for us as mentors or experienced officials to approach them without kicking them any harder, so to speak, while they're down, to try and boost their confidence and bring them back up quicker than what they might do on their own?
Very good, very good question. Very good scenario. And I'll give you a bit of history myself. I'm kind of in 20 years, I think now, and the way I receive feedback now, as opposed to when I started, was very different. And I'm sure there's lots on this call that probably experience the same. Um, it at the very beginning, it felt very punitive in a way. And now, as we've kind of refined how we develop officials, especially here in Canada, I notice it's turned a corner, and definitely in a really good way, where it's very coach-like. So, and it's more in the sense that, how do we understand? Okay, yes, an error occurred or a mistake happened, but how do we turn that into a learning opportunity for yourself? So what I've noticed personally with the referee coaches that I've been exposed to is, it's not punitive anymore. They're helping you walk you into a next step so you can work on it. And then you can use them as feedback going through. So I find it more coach-like now, as opposed to being very punitive. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's kind of what it feels like to me now. I can't speak to every area in the country, but my sense in I would say last 10 years, it's really turned a positive corner in how we provide feedback, especially to young officials, because we need them in the game. We don't need to beat them up and discourage them from wanting to pick up a whistle for the next game. We need them in the game. So how we do that and how we approach that is really a challenge to us as referee coaches, to do that in a way that's meaningful, positive, and provides confidence to those referees.
So there's just a comment here, Reed, and I think it's just a comment. It says, I find too many senior officials are tough on younger, less experienced officials on how they deal with them in what I have seen. And I think the writer, Chris or Christopher, certainly I think we've all experienced that. But as Reed noted, this is something that we're trying to turn the corner on and get away from. The focus needs to be on continuous improvement. And that comes with positive reinforcement and encouragement. So I'll just pause for a minute to see if anything else pops into the chat. And if not, firstly, thank you very much, Reed, for taking the time to put together the presentation on a very important topic for us. Greatly appreciated, some great information, and certainly like to thank the